Hey everybody, today I wanted to talk a little bit about using the Viking or Migration era sword and shield. This is kind of a project that's been brought up recently where I'm developing a tournament rule set as well as a little bit of training for a student of mine that's involved with this. This has always been a big interest of mine. A lot of the first swords I ever cut with or used were Viking style swords. So I've always been interested and curious about them. As you guys know, I've been doing a lot of research over the years in fencing, especially fencing with broadsword and targe. And in some ways it's similar, in some ways it's different. So as you see, it's like a targe is a smaller shield that's set up with straps, and you're going to be using something like a broadsword or a turkale. They were really cut oriented and pretty savage. So there's a lot of similarities between these and that. And actually the fighting style hasn't changed a ton. The difference is that using a smaller shield changes the targets a lot that you're going to be going for, as well as using a longer sword changes it a little bit, but the basic concepts of the game are the same. Thomas Page says it's very much the same as single sword. The only difference is that you use a lot less of stuff. So it's a much simpler system to use. And I would totally agree with his assessment of that. I think that also applies to Viking sword and shield, although that changes a little bit too. So what's my approach to using it? Well, I'll usually be in a left foot forward stance. The stance can change. You can switch to right foot forward, kind of a wide stance, any angled ones. It's really just about natural foot movement. And I do it similar to my boxing stance, which is going to be left foot forward. And I usually have my back foot raised a little bit. So I'm going to have my shield on an edge most of the time. And you're going to see arguments for that and against that. The reason that I like it is because I'm not blinded by it. I have full mobility with it, and it cuts out like a full solid line. It's very easy for me to parry the head, to lower it down, to parry the leg, or even the shin is actually totally doable. And I can parry on my right-hand side by crossing it just like underneath my eyes, and then I end up in like a flat position. But what I'll usually do is just parry it very quickly and come back. I can parry the top of my head by ducking down. I could even parry like the other side if I want to by raising it like this, and I can still see my opponent, and that side of my head is defended. I can also defend with my sword. Primarily I want to defend with the shield, but it's okay. It's kind of like an oh no crap moment where you got to defend with the sword. Sometimes you're gonna, and the historical record shows that. So again, not super strict. I like to be fairly balanced, not too far leaned forward or backwards, but a stance that I'm pretty mobile in. As far as guard positions for the sword, basically I don't use any. It'll look like I do though, because really if I were to make some up, because there aren't any surviving, I would say there's a cutting position and a thrusting position, and that's it. So either you're threatening with the edge of your opponent, or you're threatening with the point. And mostly you're going to be threatening with the edge, but this is really good for drawing reactions too. Sometimes people overreact, and even if I finish with a cut afterwards, it can get you where you need to be. So either one of those things is fine. It's also not strict. Because my shield is in front of my sword arm, the chances of me getting hand sniped are super low. You rarely get hit in the hand unless you really screw up like a sword parry, which most of the time you're taking on the shield anyway. Doesn't happen that much. So basically some of the things where like in fencing, if I had a complex hilt and I'd want to keep my guard in front of me, that doesn't apply. I can do bigger cuts with this if I want to. I don't have to. A lot of times straight short chops telegraph less. So that's good. You might want to wound your opponent before you do the finishing blow or spare them, whatever is going on, whatever your decision is. And then we're going to look at gripping the sword. So like always, have a nice loose grip. When you're wanting to cut, have your sword like this, or in kind of like, it can be like a hammer grip. So even though it looks like that in a lot of the pictures, I'm going to bet, just like in Fiore, just like in all the oldest stuff that we see, there's some give in the fingers. Because really to cut through epically, if you want to cut through something epically and sever it hard, you're going to need some finger squeeze. And the pommel just kind of naturally goes into a position similar to like what you do with like a foil as you're cutting. So it kind of just like sneaks past there and works as a counterbalance. And these things, you got to be careful if you're using still ones, because they hit like a longsword. They hit like a truck. These are brutal, brutal weapons. You don't need any finesse really for parrying. They're just setting up chops. It's finesse in a different way. So with that grip, you can be in a high position, totally fine, because you're not going to get this arm. My shield's in front. As soon as you do that, boom, right? I can defend it. I can be in kind of a middle position, a low position where I'm threatening with the false edge or the point, right? Or I can be in kind of thrusting positions where I'm poking over the eye, trying to, or underneath, trying to draw out of reaction. And so the first thing we're going to look at is that direct attack. The idea with the direct attack is I extend the arm just a little bit, maybe to test the water, and then I'm going to squeeze down. And I don't have to do so with opposition, although I can if I see an opportunity for that, but we'll look at that later. Right now, we'll just do it with absence of blade. But what you're going to do is extend that and just chop down. And if you want to, because you got a shield, you can totally follow through to the other side, no problem. And you get really, really savage cuts. So I'd probably just do like something like a 1, 2, a 3, or sorry, a 5, 6, or like 3, 4. Most of the evidence shows this being used with a true edge. There's not a ton of false edge. And that kind of tracks like biomechanically. If you want to throw powerful cuts, a lot of them are going to be true edge. I've got no problem with false edge being used though. Next thing is thrust. So what you can do is extend first a lot of time and then go for it. I'm not really strict about using the arm first necessarily all the time. You have a lot of coverage, but that said, you should be setting things up first. So you should be patient until you see an opening, or not even an opening, an error. So whether that's an error in distance where you can just do a direct attack very quickly because they're too close, or an error in position where you got a little bit of a feint going on and they bite. They make the parry when they shouldn't, and you can cut. So long as you're not stepping first and then cutting, that's a bit of an error because you end up too close to the person and you can't avoid their blade. So if I step in and cut like this, they're going to get their sword up in time to parry, and I can't change directions because I'm usually too close. So it's kind of sword arm first most of the time, but it's set up. It's really just set up first. So I don't even have to move my arm forward. If they bite on anything like this, my arm hasn't moved forward. They bite on that, it's fine to just finish. The next thing you want to look at is, I kind of showed you the parries already with the shield. So they're going to be minimal. They're going to be close to the body. And the idea is people who put it out first, there's kind of like, I know that they're talking about the cone of defense, but there's a big error in that, is that when I'm moving my sword or my shield forward, when should you be parrying, right? When should you be parrying? Should you be parrying before somebody attacks you? That makes you very vulnerable to feints. And so if you think in terms of fencing theory, the best time to parry is late, as late as possible, just before the attack, right? And if you're doing so beforehand, it should just be maybe a half parry, maybe just a little bit of movement to cover you. And then as they get into distance, oh, there it is, right? I can cover it. But basically, if you have it too far extended, it ruins your chances at parrying, especially to the leg. The leg is a target, the shin and the foot. So if I'm moving out every time I'm attacking, this is going to get destroyed. My head is probably going to get destroyed. Whereas if I have it here as I'm attacking, right, and you counterattack, boom. If I'm here and you counterattack, I can drop it really quickly. So it's basically like open-eyed fencing with using a shield. It's really interesting. But I think you have to have it in a retracted position most of the time. It can be out. You can do stuff with it. You can beat it. You can put it out to defend your hand if you need to. But most of the time, you're going to want it in a nice on-guard position, relaxed, so that you can parry low, high, anywhere you need to be. With the sword, most of your parries are going to be on the outside. And so I do them as beat parries with this because there's not a lot of hand protection. So you don't want to do like attached parries where it slides in right by your hand, catch it, and hit. It's possible to do that, but it doesn't come up much because people mostly fight with absence of blade. So if you take a look at like even the gladiatorial style when they're using buckler or gauntlet in James Miller, the thing that changes from a point forward when he's doing his gladiator style, a point forward outside guard, is that the outside guard, when you have a shield, is back here. And you want to keep it free so that you can use it and not be tangled up by the sword and shield. Because you have defense on the other side, you don't really need to do engagements. You don't necessarily need to cover in the same way. You're always covered on both sides. So the basic parry that I would do with a little bit of a finger squeeze is just to the outside like that, boom, and hit it. If I was going to parry low, if I needed to parry low, I would just drop it down into kind of a Sagan position. And again, probably with a little bit of a beat. You rarely need to parry on the inside, but if for whatever reason your shield is out of position and you have to, you can just do so with an inside parry like this. Again, I would do a parry forward a little bit and my blade kind of angled out towards your shoulder. This one actually comes up a lot, is that if somebody feints high to your head and you can't drop your shield in time, but your sword is low, you can actually just parry inside the same way. It's almost like a spadroon guard or an inside half, not an inside half hanger, a low inside guard is what I call it, right? So you're dropping down here, boom, that comes up. And sometimes you can even counterattack, boom, to the leg as they go for it. So that's kind of like the basic attacks and defenses. The thing that's probably the most important part of using a sword and shield is feinting. So because we don't have blade contact most of the time, the sword position is up, or with absence of blade, you don't have to worry about engagements because you're covered on the side. What ends up happening is feints play a huge, huge part in everything you do. And you really mostly just have two main targets with this, and that is head and leg. If you're doing armored, it's probably going to, which a lot of people were using armor in the period, it's going to be the open face or open eyes, depending on what kind of helmet you're wearing. And it's going to be mostly shin and leg, sometimes the thigh above the knee. This is so well covered by the shield that it's challenging to get. And the other thing is sometimes you're going to get sword arm. And that's probably the rarest of like the main targets that you go for. Is sometimes you can get the hand and sometimes you can get the arm. That's mostly if they make a gross error though. So the feints that you're going to do are either with the edge or with the point. The key is rhythm on feints. You want to start slow, and you can see this across different martial arts, and you can see this across even sword and shield styles. There's a 1920s footage of Tuareg tribesmen using stick and leather shields that are large, and what you see is slow and fast feints, right? So you want them to see what you're doing at the beginning. You start kind of winding up, moving around, drawing a reaction, and then as soon as you see them bite on something, boom, you hit them in the other spot. It's mostly going to be low-high feints. So kind of like over the top, get them to drop their shield like this and drop to the ground. It's so easy to cut people's legs because you have a shield to protect your head or potentially your arm as you go down if you're worried about it, wherever their sword is. But as I do that most of the time, I'm actually waiting to see what they do. So I'll go for the leg and then I see what they do and parry. So it's mostly low-high. You can do the same thing with thrusts. Over the top of the shield like that to bite leg or boom, over top, right? With a thrust. And then the other thing that's really common is double attacks, redoubled attacks. So a lot of times it's safe as you're going in. If they're on the defensive and you can see where their sword is, you can attack one side and hit the other. And it can be kind of like a slow, light, but it may be enough to make them react. Boom, and then come across to the other side and cut at them. So those redoubled ones are actually going for the thrust and coming down to the legs. Again, those are risky with single sword. It's risky to attack somebody twice because I'll probably get hit on the riposte before I hit them. But it's really safe to do that with the shield. And then kind of the last thing you want to work on is counterattacks. So using the shield to defend at the same time as you're hitting, it makes a little bit faster than like a 1-2 parry riposte. But if you need a riposte, do a riposte. It's fine to do it as a 1-2 sequence. This is just something to work on, right? So maybe like at the same time. And then also counterattacking with the sword. Like I said, sometimes if somebody's coming in with a cut number 1 this way, it's okay to grab it and hit at the same time. Even though your shield's there, if you can grab it with the sword with opposition and cut, sometimes that'll work. And same thing for the leg. If your shield is up high for some reason, you've been feinted out of position, it's okay to cut low like that. So you're kind of parrying at the same time and flicking your sword forward into a counterattack, and you'll hit them on the leg when they go for yours. Only very rarely, and if you make a gross error, are you going to get the body. It just doesn't happen very much. Sometimes maybe with a downwards thrust you can get it, but it's not really much of a target. So that kind of sums up the way that I'm using it. I know it's different than some of the ideas that people have, and that's okay. But the main thing that I want to say is the first step should not be overlooked in combat. So what we're seeing sometimes is that in, like German fencing, even like longsword, sometimes the sequences in that are set up so that the first attack is a failure. So in other words, you'll bind and then wind from there, or do something else, right? What I'd say about sword and shield is that, and fencing in general, is that control from beginning to end is very important. So never look past fighting for opening positions. That's just like hand fighting in jiu-jitsu or angles in boxing. With this, it's the same thing. I'm constantly looking for an opening, an angle, moving around, right? And I don't ever just want to give somebody a bind or just bind into something and try to control from there, because the first part, control from beginning to end, is better. It's easier for me to disengage and get out of distance from here at a distance where he can't hit me. And it's easier for me to do small motions with my sword, defend myself, if I have a proper distance and I care about the initial attack. So it's mostly just going to be like kind of like one hit, one kill with the sword. So that's the way that I conceptualize it. I think that's backed by the evidence, but different things work for different people. So it's totally fine to have different ideas, and I'm not slamming them too much. It's just, I think sometimes our own ideas come as a contrast to there's going to be things that we like and don't like about what people did before us. So take all this with a grain of salt. I hope you enjoyed a little brief presentation on it. It was longer than what I expected, but these are kind of like the fundamental things. And I'll be showing more of this on my channel as well.